Welcome to our session today. Look, as a clinical psychologist, I'm constantly seeing people who are just desperately searching for ways to elevate their lives, right? So I really want to guide you through a profound shift in how we approach healing and how we achieve what a lot of people like to call a higher frequency in life. Today, we're diving straight into the psychology of real, deep transformation, and we're basing this on the incredibly groundbreaking work of Carl Jung. Let's actually start by validating a pretty painful reality that so many of my patients face. You might even be sitting there right now just feeling incredibly frustrated because, you do all the inner work. You meditate, you practice positive thinking, maybe you're lighting sage, you're just endlessly adding all these new spiritual practices to your daily routine, but you still feel entirely stuck. Why is that? Why does the frequency of your life literally feel exactly the same? Well, I often diagnose this exact feeling of being stuck as spiritual avoidance. Carl Jung actually discovered something kind of unsettling about people who are constantly trying to vibe higher by just doing more and more. Often, the pursuit of enlightenment actually morphs into this clever wall that keeps you trapped in a low-frequency loop. People use these really high-minded spiritual concepts to actively hide from their own deep-seated psychology. So they feel super spiritual, but underneath it all, nothing has actually healed. And the absolutely crucial point is right here in Jung's philosophy. True transformation, it isn't about adding to your routine. It actually requires the painful but totally necessary shedding of old patterns. You don't rise by adding a dozen more habits to your morning checklist. You rise by completely letting go of the heavy, unconscious patterns that are just weighing you down. Jung basically identified 5 specific things you absolutely must release. Not manage, not reduce. Release. Okay, let's jump straight into release number 1, dropping the goodness mask. Giving up this desperate, exhausting need to be seen as a good person is almost always the very first hurdle in the therapeutic journey. Jung called this the persona. And honestly, I see this in the therapy room every single day. Patients come in just completely wiped out from the fear-based performance of being the perfect friend, the perfect child, the perfect partner. It's this mask you wear day in and day out just to win approval. You literally silence your honest feelings, especially anger, because, we tell ourselves, good people don't get mad. You abandon your boundaries just to seem endlessly understanding. But keeping up that performance, it keeps you vibrating at a mere survival level. But here's the thing. When we finally strip away this mask in therapy, we discover something really beautiful. True goodness actually allows you to be kind, yet remarkably firm. You can be generous, sure, but perfectly clear about your limits. Now, when you first drop this persona, it actually scares people a bit because they can't manipulate you with guilt anymore. But for you, it finally shifts you out of that exhausting survival mode and into genuine, authentic freedom. You're finally real. You're not just performing anymore. Moving right along to release 2, compassion versus compulsive fixing. So this directly addresses that deep-seated belief that you can or that you absolutely should save everyone around you. Jung studied this dynamic, and he called it the wounded healer. I frequently sit with patients who feel completely drained after helping someone who, get this, didn't even ask for their help in the first place. It's a pattern where a person's self-worth becomes so incredibly dependent on being needed that they unconsciously keep the people around them broken. They're helping compulsively, not out of actual love, but out of their own unhealed pain. To put this in perspective, there is a very stark clinical difference between the anxiety-driven addiction of fixing others and true, healthy compassion. The compulsion to fix literally requires others to stay broken so that you can feel valuable, and it constantly leaves you running on empty. But healthy compassion, that's driven by love. It means you can care deeply, intensely even, about someone, without feeling the need to rush in and play the rescuer. You can just listen, say, wow, that sounds really hard, and simply stop right there. Releasing that need to fix others is the only thing that leaves you with the energy you actually need for your own healing. All right, release 3, reclaiming self-trust. As we move forward here, this third release is all about letting go of that exhausting attachment to being understood by everyone. Think about how many hours of your life you've spent over-explaining yourself, just hoping and praying someone would finally get it. Clinically speaking, spending hours explaining your truth actually reveals a pretty profound lack of self-trust. If you desperately need other people to validate your reality, it means you haven't found your own solid ground yet. Real healing really kicks in when you realize that high-frequency people do not need a consensus. When they're misunderstood, they don't just collapse. They stop defending their reality and they simply live it. This brings us to release 4, grieving the projected fantasy. I'll be honest with you, this is often the most emotionally taxing part of any therapeutic journey. Letting go of the fantasy of who the people in your life could become. In psychology, we call this projection. You see someone's potential, you see their spark, and you fall completely head over heels for that imaginary person, rather than accepting the flawed reality of the human being actually standing right in front of you. Holding on to this imaginary potential is exactly what keeps my patients trapped in profoundly painful relationships. They're constantly hoping the other person will finally change into the fantasy. But as we say in therapy, they're showing you who they are. Believe them.
So to break this cycle, I guide patients through a literal emotional grieving process. Because you can't just intellectually detach from this, you must actively mourn. You literally have to cry for the small death of that imaginary person you wish they were. You have to grieve the total loss of the potential that is never going to be realized. It's tough. But only after you process that deep grief can you finally see reality clearly. And from that place of clarity, you can choose your path freely, based on who they actually are, not who you hope they'll be.
Finally, release 5, shifting from victimhood to personal responsibility.
This is our final, and frankly, the absolute hardest release, giving up your deeply ingrained identity as a wounded person. This is the ultimate clinical shift. I recently sat with a patient who had been in therapy for years, who could recite their trauma timeline perfectly to me, but who could never actually move past it. Their story of pain had essentially become the most interesting thing about them. You see, when you operate from victim consciousness, every single choice is filtered through your pain. You're always looking backward in fear. But shifting to personal responsibility, it doesn't mean denying your trauma, not at all. It means acknowledging what happened without organizing your entire life around it. You make this vital psychological shift where you become someone who was hurt, not someone who is perpetually hurt. You begin looking forward in responsibility.
So, to summarize our prognosis today, Jung warned us that true elevation is not comfortable. In fact, most people never achieve it because it requires enduring these 5 specific small deaths. The performative mask must die. The compulsive helper must die. That desperate need for outside understanding, it has to die. The romanticized fantasy of other people must die. And finally, your very identity as the wound itself must die.
You simply cannot vibrate higher while fiercely clinging to lower frequency, comfortable patterns. It's just not possible. It is only within that terrifying void, that empty, super uncertain space between who you used to be and who you are actively becoming, that genuine, high-frequency psychological transformation can actually take its first breath. You let these 5 things die so your one true self can finally rise. As we wrap up our time together in this explainer, I want you to take this final provocative thought right out of the therapy room and into your daily life. Look really closely at your own patterns. Ask yourself, which of these 5 identities is the absolute hardest for you to let go of? Are you willing to endure that small death so you can finally breathe free? Take some time to think about it, and I'll see you in our next session.